Hello, New York Giants fans, and welcome to the Big Blue View YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. All right, this weekend, your New York Giants host their rookie mini camp. First chance to look at the Giants 2024 draft class, undrafted free agents, rookie camp invites, and it's a good time to circle back, talk a little bit more about the draft class, and here to help me do that is pro football focused draft analyst Trevor Sikkema. Trevor, welcome back.
And I appreciate you having me on the show, my friend. Good to recap the draft a little bit here with you.
And I reached out to you after the draft, and we have to start with the discussion that we had before the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And the discussion that we had before the draft was about quarterback, was about whether the Giants would move up from 6, whether they would take a quarterback at 6 if they ended up having to stay there. And I'll be honest, I suspected or expected that they'd go quarterback. And you had said, prior to the draft, that you thought there was desperation on the part of the Giants to get a quarterback. As it turned out, they couldn't get up to get Drake May, couldn't or wouldn't mortgage even more of their draft capital to go get May, although I think it might have taken about 10 years worth of number ones to get the Patriots to move.
Right.
But New England was never going to move. But the Giants passed on J.J. McCarthy, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, if you want to put them in the conversation. So we have to start there. How surprised were you in how things worked out that the Giants let McCarthy, and if you want to say Penix and Nix, that they let that group of quarterbacks go by?
Yeah, when we talked about this pre-draft, me using the word desperation, I might have, if I didn't say this, I could have clarified it a little bit better. Desperate to upgrade at quarterback, right? Not necessarily desperate to get any sort of quarterback. And the closer that we got to the draft, the more we heard that the Giants just weren't as interested in McCarthy as some of these other teams were. They were really interested in Drake May, which to me, that was the upgrade, right? And we heard that they offered, a pretty good return for the New England Patriots to move back from number 3, but it wasn't enough, and it shouldn't have been enough. I mean, New England should not have moved off of that pick. They did the right thing there, but I think that the Giants probably put forth what their best offer was going to be, realistic, and it wasn't enough. So I think the fact that they put that out there shows that they were desperate to upgrade at that quarterback position, but clearly they didn't see McCarthy or Penix or Nix as these major upgrades, even to stick at number 6 and pick them. So to me, maybe not as desperate as we once thought with this team. And it's interesting that they weren't as interested in McCarthy, who I think his hype was sort of overplayed within the draft community, right? I think that we went from being this day 2 pick at the beginning of the season, he's a late first-round pick, and now he's around a top 10 pick, and now all of a sudden you got to trade into the top 5 to go get McCarthy, and it felt like we just kept upping the ante every time we talked about McCarthy, and it ends up he gets picked at number 10 overall. So it always does feel like that when you talk about quarterbacks, maybe that last step of like, oh, this guy's going here, maybe that's a little overblown, and maybe it's the previous step. We got to go back a little bit. So that was just the case with McCarthy, and I think with any quarterback for any team, you get to your own evaluations and your own scouting and how you think that they're going to fit in your team and your building with your culture and your organization. And they just didn't believe that McCarthy was going to be that big of an upgrade for them. They'd rather wait and try to get a different quarterback or see if it pans out with Daniel Jones. So I do think that they were desperate to go up, but not necessarily desperate to get any quarterback by any means necessary.
Right. The more I thought about it, the closer we got to the draft, the more I realized that you look at Joe Shane, Brian Daboll coming from Buffalo, the history with Josh Allen, all of that, the quarterback in this draft who reminded of Josh Allen, both physically and sort of with the college resume that was Drake May all the way. And so it made sense because of all the traits and the history. It made sense for that to be the guy. The other thing that I always say is if you don't love the quarterback, especially that high in the draft, if you don't love the quarterback, or if you're going to take the quarterback, you better love the guy.
Right.
Because you're marrying the guy, you're putting the future of your, for Shane and Dable, you're putting your jobs in the kid's hands, and you better love the guy, or just wait until you find the guy that you do love. And obviously, the Giants made the choice that they didn't love JJ McCarthy enough.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's a good conclusion to come to of how they got to that point. Because I agree with you. It is
right.
Taking a quarterback in the top 10, like you said. It's you're putting your stamp on it, and
right.
When it doesn't work out, sometimes the whole regimes fall. If that's the case,
right.
You got to be really sure about a guy for that being the case.
Absolutely. And with that said, the Giants went ahead and took Malik Nabers, which gives them the wide receiver one that they've been looking for. And just staying at number 6, I had thought maybe they would go for Rome Odunze, but think about Brian Daboll, and I should have known, all along that Nabers would be the guy that he would prefer, between those two, just because of the speed, because of the run after catch, because of the electricity and all of that. I should have known that he would love Nabers instead of Odunze.
Look, I had Malik Nabers as my wide receiver 2 in this class. I think that both of them are fantastic, but Nabers just brings an athletic edge, like you said, to the table that really even none of these other wide receivers, even Marvin Harrison Jr., was able to match. And I think that whenever you have that sort of athletic trump card in your back pocket, it's really hard for GMs and head coaches to be able to overlook that for anybody else, no matter how talented they are. So, for Malik Nabers, he immediately becomes wide receiver 1 in this offense. He immediately becomes, like you said, somebody who gives you a lot of yards after catch ability. And it's hard to not draw the parallels, right? 10 years ago, a decade ago, you draft Odell Beckham Jr., and he's sort of that same sort of player, right? I mean, he just wins off of being an elite athlete and that yards after catch ability, and he wins Rookie of the Year, and he just has so many great moments and years with the New York Giants. It's hard to not think that you're also going to get that out of Malik Nabers too. So, with their wide receiver room the way that it was, you didn't want to overlook somebody like that just because, okay, well, we have some smaller receivers on the team right now. We want the bigger body. Odunze. No. If you think that Malik Nabers is the better player, draft a better player. That's what it all comes down to. So for them to take the swing of the bat with Nabers, in my opinion, was the right call to make.
And it's really interesting. If you look at it, what Joe Schoen has done in 3 drafts at the wide receiver position. He took Wan'Dale Robinson, and obviously he took Robinson earlier than some people thought he would take Robinson, traded back a couple times to do it. The kid's a good player, and I don't think the kid's shown his best yet because of the knee injury that he suffered. But he's taken Wan'Dale Robinson. He's taken Jalen Hyatt. Now he's taken Malik Nabers. He still has Darius Slayton. They've got a ton of speed. And I mean, at the tight end spot, he's drafted Daniel Bellinger and now Theo Johnson as well. So he really has remade that pass catching group into one where if they can block, they shouldn't have any excuses for not having a quality passing attack.
There's a lot of guys that are there, and I think that you see this draft strategy all the time with normally young quarterbacks, but even some situations like we're seeing with Daniel Jones, right? You don't want to leave any questions You want the answer. Is this guy, is this quarterback the guy or not, right? I mean, Carolina's in the midst of that. Carolina spent a lot of money on their offensive line to better their interior offensive line. They went out and they drafted a running back that could be an RB1 for them in the second round. They drafted a wide receiver in the first round. They drafted a tight end in round 4, who I think could have been a day 2 pick, right? And they're all doing that. They trade for Deontay Johnson. They're doing all of that because the only thing that matters right now moving forward for the Carolina Panthers is answering the question, is Bryce Young the guy? With the New York Giants, it's all about setting up and answering the question, do we have the guy on the roster? Because if we don't, then we're going absolutely all in on one next year, because a lot of the rest of the pieces are going to still be here. So I think that New York is doing the right thing. They tried to move up for the guy that they wanted. They didn't force it with a quarterback just because he plays that position that they weren't happy with. And instead, they just went out and, like you said, drafted a tight end who could be a really good vertical threat for them. Malik Neighbors, who I think could be a wide receiver 1. They spent the free agency money along the offensive line. And then Tyrone Tracy, too. But I think there's a world where Tyrone Tracy could even be RB1 on this team at some point. With the athletic ability that he has, that explosiveness, his ability to catch the ball out of the backfield as a former wide receiver. So all of that is there. And I think that's exactly what the Giants went into this offseason thinking that they wanted to do, is answer that question of whether or not the guy is on the roster. Because after this, there's not going to be an excuse that they can have.
It's interesting that you mentioned Tracy, and let's go there. You know, I was going to kind of go through the class a little bit, but Tracy is so interesting. 5th round pick, kid who played some running back in high school, but was really a weapon, pass catcher, played some running back, but played 4 years of wide receiver at Iowa, transfers to Purdue, gets with a coach that had been trying to convince him to be a running back for several years.
Right.
Finally decides that maybe is the right move. And this kid, Trevor, when I watch this kid, he doesn't look like an inexperienced running back. He looks like a kid who's natural, running between the tackles and finding space and setting up blocks and squeezing through a hole. It looks like the position where the kid belongs. Mm-hmm. And I mean, to me, if this kid's got a couple years of running back experience, he's a day 2 pick easily.
I think Tracy is a lot of fun. Now, I will sort of agree with you. I think he's a natural playmaker when he gets the ball in his hands. Like, it's almost like he turns into a kid at recess, where he's just getting the ball out of the backfield and he's just trying to make people miss. And there are times when the timing of getting your blocks set up and really being patient, like there is that he still has to get better at. Like, that's the part of running back play and vision and patience that he is still working at. But like you said, you can't really expect him to have all of that given how little he has played the running back position. So I think that when you look at what he does well and how natural of a playmaker he is out of the backfield, that gives you a lot of faith that, like, man, this dude could really be something for me. I thought he was going to go much earlier than the 5th round. Even for his inexperience, I thought that he was going to be like a priority day 3 pick, somebody that's picked early in the 4th round, maybe even could have snuck there into the 3rd round because of how great of an athlete that he is. And again, that word natural just continues to come to my mind when I think about it, because his running style is very unique. I mean, he's just very upright. Like, he's just not. You can just tell he hasn't played running back very long. But when you get the ball in his hands, magic can happen. And I think that he's got a lot of X factor ability to him that can really show up and be a difference-making presence in the Giants' backfield. So I think that there's a world where he can get some carries even as early as a rookie, really stand out for this team.
While we're on the topic of running back, I want to go back to last year's draft quickly. The Giants obviously moved on from Saquon Barkley. They've built a running back room, which is going to be running back by committee, where Devin Singletary is RB1, but he's not the workhorse that he's never been the workhorse that Barkley was. There's going to be carries for other people, for Tyrone Tracy. perhaps for Eric Gray, who the Giants drafted in the 5th round a year ago. Gray never really got a chance as a running back last year. They used him a little bit as a kick and punt returner, and that didn't go very well. I'm just curious, if you can think back. I'm curious what you thought of Eric Gray.
So I actually really liked Eric Gray, when he was at Oklahoma. I remember watching his film, and it was him and it was Kennedy Brooks who were in the same backfield there, and that was probably when I was most heavily scouting him there when he was with Oklahoma. And I remember thinking this guy's got juice. Like, I thought this guy could be a difference maker at the NFL level, and he's had his opportunities throughout college to be that starting bell cow running back, and he didn't exactly take the bull by the horns, but I'm a believer in Eric Gray. I was higher on Eric Gray than a lot of other people. I remember watching him when he first started at Tennessee, and some of those flash plays that he had were awesome. And I thought that the way that he could cut at full speed was a separating trait. And I feel like he hasn't really truly unleashed that at the NFL level. I wonder if that's still coming for him, because when I was watching him at Tennessee and then at Oklahoma, I felt like there was a lot in the tank for him to be a potentially successful pro. So I like Eric Gray.
So maybe there's a couple of good, interesting young running backs in that backfield who can make some plays for the Giants. Yeah. So let's talk about, and we're kind of jumping around as we record this. Earlier today, I read a piece that you did at Pro Football Focus listing Giants 3rd round pick Andrew Phillips as your favorite pick of the 3rd round. Mm-hmm. And you and I were discussing this off the air a little bit before we started to record. Andrew Phillips is a guy who, whatever player he is, whatever talent he is, he draws a little bit of a mixed reaction, a little bit of a puzzled reaction from Giants fans, simply, and it has nothing to do with the player. I think it's simply because Joe Shane said, well, we're going to start him out in the slot. A lot of the scouting reports say maybe he's going to be a better slot than an outside corner. And I know I was expecting the Giants to go after a true outside boundary corner in the draft. I think Giants fans were probably expecting that as well. And instead they went and they took a guy who probably, maybe he's better than Cordale Flott, but he sort of duplicates in a way something that they already have when they still have that question as to who's, cornerback 2 on the outside. So just tell us a little bit about Andrew Phillips.
Yeah, I don't really see him as a slot corner. If you want to start him there because he's a rookie, and sometimes that's what happens with rookies, I guess that could be the case. But the reason why I love him so much with the Giants is I think he's an outside corner. When you look at his measurables, I'm looking at him right now. This is, for just all cornerbacks in general, 31st percentile height, 39th percentile weight, 42nd percentile wingspan and arm length. I mean, sure, it's below 50th percentile, but it's not like he's incredibly small for the position. I think that he could play outside, and I watched him at the Senior Bowl and in his tape at Kentucky this past year play on the outside and have a lot of success at that. Whether it was guarding small receivers or big receivers, he was up to the task. So this is instead somebody where I look at what he does well in his skill sets. I mean, this is a press man type of corner, and I love Deonte Banks for them last year, and the fact that they get to pair Deonte Banks, who is a great press man corner, with another press man corner on the outside in Andrew Phillips. To me, that was what I love so much about the pick. That 1-2 combination of being able to call an aggressive form of coverage, whether it's 2-man or cover 0 or cover 1, and say, all right, go guard your guy. Don't let him get away from you. And now you've got the horses to be able to win that kind of a race, if you will. So to me, I think that he can play in the slot, but I looked at Andrew Phillips as an outside corner, and I think that that's where he's going to be at some point, because I do agree with you. I think that Flott is somebody who could play in the slot for you, and your best 3 in a nickel situation is going to be Phillips and Banks on the outside and Flott on the inside. So, them saying that he will start out in the slot, I wonder if that's just kind of hey, this is kind of how we do things with rookie cornerbacks, and eventually they'll build him up to be an outside corner. But I've always seen him as an outside corner, and that's why I really like the pick with that pairing with Banks.
Interesting. It's one of those things where I know people were a little bit, I think everybody expected a corner,
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of what you hear about Phillips is maybe he's better. So it's just interesting, and hopefully you'll be right. This is one of those things, Trevor, and it's one of those things where I love it when a guy is willing to more or less swim against the tide. I keep hearing people say, "Oh, we think he's better inside. I think he's better inside." And you're basically saying, I see an outside guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that, because I love it when guys are willing to do their own work, come to their own conclusion, and not just sort of say, well, everybody else thinks this guy is X, so I better not say I think he's Z. So I enjoy that. I think that's great.
No, I think that he plays. When I watched him on tape, I thought he played with a ton of confidence when he had the sideline to work with, man. I thought that made him more confident to get hands on receivers and play press more aggressively and confidently and competitively. And that's always going to yield the best results of the position. So, look, he's got the quickness and the explosiveness to be able to play in the slot, but I just felt as though he played more confidently when he had that boundary to him, when he was able to lock those guys down on the outside. So, to me, I've always viewed Andrew Phillips as an outside corner.
Yeah, people don't quite understand how much more difficult, or a lot of people don't, how much more difficult it can be to play in the slot,
Oh, my
because
goodness. Yeah, it's
because
brutal.
because you're going up against a guy who's probably generally really quick, really fast, and has a two-way go. He can go inside, he can go outside. There's plus he can run through all kinds of traffic. So it's when you're out on the boundary, you can use the sideline. You don't have that to your advantage as a slot guy.
Right, right.
I want to talk about some of the other guys. Let's talk about Tyler Nubin, safety out of Minnesota. Second round pick, 47th overall, which seemed to be right about the range where the consensus had him going. Ended up as the first safety off the board. Not surprised at all that the Giants took a safety. Maybe a little bit surprised given Joe Shane's positional value, thinking at times that they went safety in round 2. Are you at all concerned about Nubin's testing numbers? I mean, his relative athletic score wasn't great. His athletic testing wasn't great. Some people think maybe that's because of the knee injury he was coming back from. But are you at all concerned about Nubin's athleticism? What do you think of that pick?
I'm really not. I've got 2 years of tape to show me that this guy's plenty athlete enough to be able to make plays on the ball and roam around the field and play in robber roles and even deep in those 2 safety sets. So I'm really not worried about the testing. That's one where you go, okay, have I already seen a better athlete when he's out there on the field? Yes, I feel like I have. So that's one that I would kind of chalk up to, hey, not everybody is the athlete that you want them to be on the track and field circuit, to be able to run the 40-yard dash after getting into a track sprinter stance, or, just doing those agility drills and things like that. I'm not too worried about it because I've seen better athleticism from him on tape. And I think that's where he's more of a natural anyways. Would I have liked for him to test better? Sure. Of course, I think I would have liked that. But there's too many instances where I see him breaking on the ball or getting down to something and coming downfield for a tackle, getting into the backfield, being able to retreat and flip the hips. Like, all of that is there for him. So I did not see enough of an athletic concern. Now, do I think he's going to play like a single high role in the NFL? No, I never really thought that. But the testing numbers, it's not like I thought he was going to test out of the roof and he was going to be more of a single high safety anyways. So to me, it was more. There's more positive tape, which is what matters most when it comes to judging athleticism.
Absolutely. I know people want to they want to make a lot out of the testing numbers, but they are what they are. And if you have instincts and anticipation and those kinds of things, you can be in the right spot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Theo Johnson, tight end out of Penn State, 4th round pick, probably good value at 107th pick overall. Giants obviously in a situation where they're still waiting on Darren Waller to officially tell them he's going to retire. Because at this point, we're in May, and at this point, I'll be shocked if Waller decides to play. If he's gone this far and not been able to make up his mind, I would think he's headed toward retiring. So, just your thoughts on Johnson, and what the ceiling is there, and maybe how quickly he could be expected to really contribute.
Yeah, I didn't. Some people like Johnson more than I did, but even for like what he is, I see the value as a vertical threat type of tight end. Somebody who can get off the line of scrimmage, really big body. He can give you a little bit of plus blocking ability as well. If you put him in a slot, he's a big time mismatch. Even if you're just sending him deep, I mean, it's tough for some of those slot assignments, especially if it's a smaller corner, a safety, to be able to match up with this guy size-wise. And he's got pretty good explosiveness coming out of his stance and running up the field. Now, of course, just because he's a bigger body, he's 6'6", he's not going to turn on a dime. He's not going to run the whole route tree for you. And so, I think that all of those things go into what you're projecting of the player and how good that he's going to be. And I think that there's a reason, in my opinion, that he's a 4th round pick and not necessarily like a 3rd or 2nd round pick, like his size and athleticism might hint itself to believe. It's because he's not too well rounded when it comes to his route tree. But again, even if what you see is what you get from Theo Johnson, even if he is just sort of this vertical seam buster type of a safety that can really put fits tight end, they can really put fits on the safeties by demanding that they pay attention, that they're close to him and they can't retreat as far because they know that he's going to be able to thread the needle over the middle, over the linebackers. So, and if that's the case, whenever you are a big-time vertical threat from the tight end position, you're going to carry value. So, to me, even if that's what he is, that's fine for the Giants.
All right, and the last guy, 6th round pick, Darius Muasau, linebacker out of UCLA, and it's really a two-pronged question. It's a little bit about what you think of the player, and I will admit this is not a kid that was on my radar initially. I mean, I don't study hundreds and hundreds of players like a lot of you guys do. This was not a kid that I was really familiar with, but it's a little bit about why the Giants liked this kid. And the other part of that question that Giants fans shake their head a little bit about is they look at the draft and they say, the Giants are the only team out of 32 that didn't draft an offensive or defensive lineman. And especially on the offensive line side of the ball, obviously their line was bad last year. They signed a bunch of guys in free agency, but there's a little bit of, I can't believe the Giants didn't draft an offensive lineman somewhere. So it's a little bit about Muasau, and it's also a little bit about when you look at the Giants, if you're maybe surprised that there wasn't an offensive lineman taken somewhere along the way.
Yeah, first off with Muasau, I think he's going to be a really good depth player and special teams guy for you. I mean, he just loves physicality, man. He loves the physical nature of playing the position and playing the game. You could even see that at the Shrine Bowl when I was down there watching him in person at that event in Frisco, Texas. I mean, you're not supposed to be hitting too hard, but you could tell he wanted the pads to crack, man. And so he's somebody who was a 2-star recruit out of high school, only had one D1 offer, and it was from Hawaii. So he started his career at Hawaii, moves over to UCLA, becomes a starting middle linebacker there. Good recognition, just kind of limited with his speed and his range, and I think his coverage ability as well. But again, he's a hitter, man. I think that he can anticipate pretty well when it comes to those downhill run defense plays, and he'll be a good depth player for him. I think he'll be a really nice special teams player. And then the second part of this question, I'm not really shocked that they didn't draft an offensive or defensive lineman. Now, if they would have drafted one here and there, it's not like I would have been shocked if they would have, but they spent a lot of money on getting a new offensive line in there, which Jermaine Illuminor and John Runyon and Aaron Stinney and like guys like that. I mean, you drafted John Michael Schmitz early last year. They brought in a ton of new guys on the offensive line, and then they made the big trade to go get Brian Burns on the defensive line. So they already made their additions to the trenches. They weren't gonna. They weren't just going to draft a defensive lineman in round 5 or 6 just to say that they did it. They already had their investments there, and I think they went in other positions. And to me, it's hard to look at what the Giants did from a 50,000-foot view of free agency in the draft and say, yeah, I don't like what they did. Because instead, I think it's the opposite. I really like what the Giants did. I think they went about this offseason correctly, and I think the team got a lot better for it.
Yeah, the one thing that's interesting is it's not a draft question. I was talking on a show the other day with Tony Del Genio, who's one of my guys at Big Blue View, and we were discussing the idea of whether the roster got better, and you can argue that the roster got better simply because there's two game-changing players on it who weren't on it at the end of last year, which is Brian Burns and Malik Neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean those are the two biggest difference makers that you wanted on both sides of the ball. You're not going to get major offensive line upgrades in free agency. Like it's just very, very difficult to be able to do that. Normally, if guys are hitting free agency, yeah, there's a reason. And you don't often get those good offensive linemen, especially those good offensive tackles that you feel great about. And a lot of those guys don't become available for trade either. So to get the pass rush you needed, to sign the offensive lineman you needed, to get the wide receiver you needed, basically the only option that was not hit full court press was quarterback. And it was kind of this, all right, well, we took our shot at making that happen, and it didn't. And it just didn't.
Let me ask you this last thing before I let you go. Evan Neal entering his third year, and Giants fans are still gnashing their teeth. They want to kill Joe Shane for drafting him 7th overall a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think 95% of draft analysts would tell you, going back and looking at their notes and how they felt about Neal, almost everybody thought he was a top 10 worthy pick at the time. The question is, do you look at Evan Neal and think it's over for Evan Neal, as a right tackle, or do you look at Evan Neal and think, he can still be at least a serviceable, NFL right tackle?
I don't know the answer to that question, obviously, because I think the only person who can answer it is Evan Neal himself, right? I mean, he's an extremely talented person. And the Giants lit a fire underneath him with all the additions that they brought into the offensive line, both at guard and at tackle. And we're basically like, okay, look, you've got every chance in the world to earn one of these starting spots here, especially at right tackle, of course. If you don't, we will put somebody else in there. And it's beyond this, like, okay, we drafted you high, you're going to get this spot anyways, kind of a thing. And that's just, so we're going to get whatever the best version of Evan Neal is this year. And whether that's worthy to be a starting offensive tackle or not, we'll see. But I had him as a top 10 player. I had him as my number 2 offensive tackle behind Charles Cross. So I thought that he was going to be fantastic. I love the overall size and athleticism. And so it's not a lack of talent from him. It's just, whatever it's been, it's caused some inconsistencies throughout his first couple of years in the league. And so now it's basically going to be do or die for him. Not that he'll get another chance after this if it fails in New York, but how good of a chance and how legit of a chance that will be, we'll see. If anything's going to motivate him, it'd be right here trying to make sure he can salvage this situation with the Giants.
All right. Hey, Trevor, thank you. As always, appreciate the insight. Folks, check out Trevor's work at Pro Football Focus. And as always, thank you for listening. Stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.